Hi, I'm Sophia. 3 days ago, I dragged myself to my family's ancestral estate for the reading of my grandmother's will, armed with nothing but hope and a lifetime of broken promises. I left with 4 broken ribs, blood soaking my silk blouse, and my brother's laughter echoing in my ears as the family fortunes slipped through my fingers. He didn't just take my inheritance. He took my dignity in front of our entire family. Not a single person stepped forward when he slammed me against the marble mantelpiece. My mother turned away. My cousins stared at their shoes. My aunt whispered, "Just let it go." But this wasn't just about money. It was about decades of manipulation, theft, and lies that all converged in that moment. So what do you think happened after I made one phone call that night? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still don't know why I bothered showing up. This thought played on repeat as I stood in the corner of my grandmother's library, clutching my purse like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The room reeked of old money, leather-bound books that no one read, oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, and furniture worth more than what most people make in a year. 23 relatives had gathered, all dressed in appropriate mourning attire that somehow still managed to showcase their wealth. All here for the reading of my grandmother Eleanor's will, the matriarch who built our family fortune from nothing, who taught me to paint when no one else had time for me, and who promised me in whispers during our private afternoons together that I would be taken care of. And then there was my brother, Thomas, Harvard law graduate, father's pride, the golden child who could do no wrong even when he did everything wrong. I was just Sophia, the daughter who chose art over business school. The disappointment. The family charity case who needed to be reminded of her place at every holiday dinner. I told myself I came because it was the right thing to do. Because grandmother would have wanted me here. Because some naive part of me still believed in fairness. That's what I repeated silently as I watched my mother drift between family members, her diamond earrings catching the afternoon light, her grief performance impeccable. My father stood by the fireplace with Thomas and our uncles, already discussing business opportunities, as if grandmother's body wasn't still warm in her grave. "Sophia," my cousin Rebecca said as she passed, her voice dripping with false warmth. "It's thoughtful of you to join us today." Thoughtful, like I was doing them a favor by existing in their space. I forced what I hoped resembled a smile. Wouldn't miss it. My mother spotted me then, her expression shifting from practiced sorrow to thinly veiled annoyance. She glided over, champagne in hand despite the early hour. "I hope you're not expecting much," she murmured, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Eleanor was always practical about these things. Practical, the code word for, "you're getting nothing." I straightened my shoulders. "I'm not here for money, Mother." "Of course not," she replied with a tight smile. "Your little art projects keep you comfortable enough, I'm sure." Before I could respond, Thomas appeared, somehow making his tailored black suit look like armor. "Ah, the prodigal sister returns," he announced, voice pitched to Carrie. "Grandmother would be so touched that you could fit this into your busy schedule of painting. What is it now? Sunsets? Kittens?" I felt heat rise to my face. My first gallery showing had been last month, contemporary landscapes that had earned critical praise. He knew this. He'd received the invitation I'd sent despite knowing he wouldn't come. "Abstracts, actually," I replied evenly. "One just sold to the Whitmore collection." Thomas's smile didn't reach his eyes. How quaint. "I suppose we all need hobbies." He turned to address the room. "Though some of us are busy managing the family interests, the real legacy grandmother built." Something inside me snapped. 6 years of therapy had taught me to breathe through these moments, but sometimes breathing isn't enough. "Interesting definition of managing, Thomas," I said, matching his volume. "Is that what we're calling your gambling habits now?" The room went silent. Thomas's moment, I remembered why I usually stayed quiet. My father stepped forward, his presence suddenly filling the space between us. "That's enough," he said, his voice low but carrying. "The lawyer is here." Let's all remember why we've gathered today. Mr. Harrington, our family's attorney for 3 generations, entered with the gravitas of a man who knew he held everyone's futures in his leather portfolio. We all took our seats around the massive oak table where grandmother had once taught me to play chess. I chose a chair near the door. Always have an exit strategy, grandmother used to say. The reading started with the usual formalities. Grandmother's voice, transmitted through the sterile language of legal documents, felt wrong somehow. Cold. When she was alive, her words had been sharp, sometimes cutting, but always vibrant with life. Small bequests were distributed first. The housekeeper received a generous pension. Cousins and distant relatives got modest sums or specific heirlooms. My mother's pearls were actually shaking as Mr. Harrington moved through the list, her impatience barely contained. And now, to the matter of Rosewood Estate and the primary financial assets, Mr. Harrington announced, adjusting his glasses. Thomas sat forward, one hand already extended as if to receive the keys to the kingdom. My father nodded slightly, the outcome a foregone conclusion. Eleanor Rose Montgomery leaves her controlling interest in Montgomery Industries to be divided as follows. Mr. Harrington continued. 60% to her granddaughter, Sophia Eleanor Montgomery. The world stopped. I couldn't have heard correctly. The remaining 40% to her grandson, Thomas James Montgomery. Mr. Harrington finished, seemingly oblivious to the bomb he'd just detonated. Thomas stood so quickly his chair crashed backward. This is absurd. There must be a mistake. Mr. Harrington looked over his glasses. There is no mistake, Mr. Montgomery. Your grandmother was quite clear. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. No one moved to clean it up. Furthermore, Mr. Harrington continued. Rosewood Estate, including all lands, properties, and contents, is bequeathed to Sophia Eleanor Montgomery, with the stipulation that it remain her primary residence for a minimum of 5 years. The room erupted. My father was on his feet, demanding explanations. Aunts and uncles murmured among themselves. My cousin Rebecca looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. But Thomas was completely still, his gaze fixed on me with such hatred that I felt it like a physical blow. She can't manage a company, he finally said, his voice unnaturally calm. She majored in fine arts, for God's sake. She'll destroy everything grandmother built. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. Ms. Montgomery will have the benefit of the board of directors, naturally. And your grandmother left explicit instructions that Ms. Montgomery is to be given all necessary support in assuming her new role. Thomas laughed then, a hollow sound that sent chills down my spine. Support? Of course. He turned to me, eyes glittering. Congratulations, Sophia. You finally got what you wanted. I didn't ask for this, I said quietly, still trying to process what was happening. No? He hissed. You were always her favorite. Always the special one, the artistic one. Poor delicate Sophia, who needed extra protection. Extra love. Extra everything. My father placed a restraining hand on Thomas's shoulder. We'll contest it, he said firmly. Eleanor wasn't thinking clearly near the end. Mr. Harrington shook his head. I must inform you that Mrs. Montgomery underwent thorough psychological evaluation prior to making these changes to her will. The documentation is extensive and would certainly withstand legal challenge. Changes? My mother repeated, finding her voice. When did she change it? Approximately 3 months ago, Mr. Harrington replied. 3 months ago. When Thomas had convinced my father to leverage family assets for his disastrous investment scheme. When grandmother had asked to see the books and been denied. When I'd found her crying in her garden for the first time. Wishes while ensuring the company remains properly managed. I understood the subtext perfectly. They would let me keep the house, maybe some money, while they continued to control everything else. The same arrangement they'd tried to enforce my entire adult life. I think grandmother was very clear about her wishes, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. And I intend to honor them. Thomas slammed his fist on the table. You have no idea what you're doing. You'll destroy her legacy. Or maybe I'll protect it, I countered. The way she wanted me to. My mother gave a dismissive wave. Don't be dramatic, Sophia. You've never shown the slightest interest in business. What would you even do with a company? Learn, I said simply. Grandmother believed I could. Thomas moved so quickly I didn't have time to react. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed my arm and yanked me to my feet. You manipulated her, he snarled, his face inches from mine. What did you tell her? What lies did you spin about me? Let go of me, I said, trying to pull away. His grip tightened. You've never earned anything in your life. You think you can just waltz in and take everything we've built? Everything I've worked for? Thomas, my father warned, but there was no real force behind it. He'd never intervened when Thomas lost his temper before. The truth is, Thomas continued, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me, you're nothing without the Montgomery name. Nothing without our money. Just a mediocre artist playing at success. I'd heard these words before, in different variations, throughout my life. But something was different now. Maybe it was grandmother's faith in me, still fresh and powerful. Maybe it was years of therapy finally bearing fruit. Or maybe I was just tired of being afraid. Let go of me. Each word was a bullet. Thomas's grip loosened slightly, surprise flickering across his face. I never pushed back. I yanked my arm free and stepped away. I'm not taking anything from you, I said, my voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. Grandmother made her choice, and I'm making mine. I turned to leave, to walk out with whatever dignity I could salvage. I'd made it halfway across the room when Thomas's voice stopped me. I should have known, he said, venom dripping from each word. You were always her project. Her charity case. The broken little girl she tried to fix. I kept walking. She felt sorry for you, he called after me. That's all it ever was. I reached for the door handle, my escape so close. You want to play CEO? Fine, but remember this. I know where all the bodies are buried. I know what really happened with the Reynolds deal. With the property in Singapore. With the tax shelters. I turned back, confusion replacing anger. What are you talking about? Thomas smiled, a predator sensing weakness. Oh, sweet, naive Sophia, did you think grandmother's hands were clean? That the Montgomery fortune was built on good intentions? Ask your new board of directors about the indigenous lands we developed. About the worker safety complaints we buried. About the politicians we own. My father stepped forward. Thomas, that's enough. No, Thomas snapped. If she wants to sit in the big chair, she should know exactly what she's inheriting. I felt sick. Was he telling the truth? Or just trying to scare me? Grandmother had always emphasized ethics, integrity, doing the right thing even when it cost you. I don't believe you, I said finally. Thomas laughed. Believe whatever you want. The truth is in the company servers, in the private accounts, in the sealed court documents. You think you can change things? Good luck. The system was built to protect people like us from people like you. I didn't understand what he meant by people like you, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. I was the outsider. Always had been. I'm leaving now, I said, turning back to the door. Running away again? Thomas taunted. Your signature move. When things get hard, Sophia disappears. To art school, to Europe, to her little apartment where she can pretend she's not a Montgomery. I put my hand on the doorknob. She should have left it to me, he said, his voice suddenly rough with emotion. I was the one who stayed. I was the one who learned the business. I was the one who protected her legacy while you were painting pretty pictures. Something in his tone made me turn around. For a moment, beneath the rage, ask for this, Thomas, I said quietly. Liar, he spat, and then he was moving toward me faster than I could react. His hands hit my shoulders with such force that I stumbled backward. My back slammed against something hard, the marble mantelpiece, knocking the wind from my lungs. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. I heard something crack inside me, felt fire spread across my rib cage. I gasped for air that wouldn't come. Thomas loomed over me, his face contorted with rage I barely recognized. "You think you can just take everything? My birthright? My future?" His hand connected with my face, snapping my head back against the marble. Stars exploded behind my eyes. "Thomas!" My father's voice seemed far away. "Stop this!" But he didn't move to intervene. Neither did my mother, who stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth in what might have been horror or might have been embarrassment at the scene. Thomas grabbed my shoulders again, shaking me like a rag doll. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through my chest. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My vision tunneled to just his face, twisted with hatred. "I should have been her favorite," he was saying, his words barely penetrating through the pain. "I did everything right, everything they asked. While you just had to exist, just had to be her precious little artist." Somehow, through the fog of pain, I found my voice. "Let me go, Thomas." "Or what?" he sneered. "What will you do? Call the police on your own brother? On your family? You're nothing without us. Nothing!" With strength born of desperation, I brought my knee up hard between his legs. He doubled over, cursing, and I stumbled away from him, one arm wrapped protectively around my ribcage. Each breath was torture, but I forced myself to stay upright, to keep moving toward the door. "You'll regret this," Thomas gasped from behind me. "I promise you'll regret this." I didn't look back. Somehow I made it to the hallway, then to the grand foyer with its sweeping staircase where we'd taken so many family photos over the years. The portraits of stern-faced Montgomerys seemed to watch me with disapproval as I staggered toward the front door. The family driver, thankfully not one of Thomas's confidants, took one look at my face and rushed to help me into the car. Hospital was all I could manage to say before the pain overwhelmed me. The emergency room was a blur of fluorescent lights, concerned faces, and clinical questions. X-rays confirmed what I already knew: 4 broken ribs and severe bruising. The doctor's expression darkened when I explained I'd fallen against a fireplace. "This impact pattern is consistent with an assault," she said quietly, showing me the films. "Would you like me to call someone? The police, perhaps?" I closed my eyes, feeling tears leak from the corners. Call the police on Thomas Montgomery, heir to the Montgomery fortune? Report my own brother for assault? In our world, family problems stayed within the family. That's what I'd been taught since childhood. "No," I whispered. "No police." She nodded, disappointment evident in her eyes, but she didn't push. "I'm giving you my card," she said, slipping it into my purse. "If you change your mind, or if you just need someone to talk to." 3 hours later, heavily medicated and wrapped in bandages, I was wheeled out to a taxi. The driver helped me into my apartment building, concern etched on his face as I winced with each step. Inside my modest 2-bedroom, chosen specifically because it was the opposite of the Montgomery mansion's opulence, I collapsed onto my sofa, unable to make it to the bedroom. The pain medication made the world soft around the edges, but it couldn't touch the deeper ache. Not just in my ribs, but in my heart. My own brother had done this. My parents had watched and done nothing. I'd always known I was different, the odd one out in a family of sharks. But I'd convinced myself that blood meant something, that underneath it all they would protect me if it really mattered. I was wrong. My phone buzzed insistently from my purse. Texts from friends, wondering how the will reading had gone. Emails from Mr. Harrington with documents requiring my attention. A voicemail from my mother asking me to be reasonable and not do anything rash. Nothing from Thomas. No apology, no concern. Just silence that spoke volumes. I stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Grandmother had trusted me with her legacy. Why? What had she seen in me that my own parents couldn't? And what was Thomas talking about? Buried secrets? Dirty deals? Corporate skeletons? My gaze drifted to my desk in the corner. Grandmother Eleanor at 30, fierce and beautiful, painted by her favorite artist. She'd given it to me on my 21st birthday with a note. Remember who you are and what you're made of. The world will try to tell you otherwise. I reached for my phone again, scrolling past family contacts to a name I hadn't called in years. Marcus Finch. Back in law school, he'd been brilliant but struggling. A scholarship student surrounded by trust fund kids. I'd tutored him through corporate law, let him crash on my couch when his roommates locked him out, even paid his application fee for the firm where he now worked as one of the top investigators of corporate malfeasance. "You saved my career," he'd told me once. I won't forget it. My finger hovered over his name. If anyone could help me navigate what I'd just inherited, both the company and the apparent secrets, it was Marcus. The pain in my ribs flared as I shifted, a sharp reminder of what was at stake. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about truth, about justice, about finally standing up after a lifetime of being pushed down. I pressed call. The phone rang twice before his familiar voice answered. "Sophia Montgomery?" he said, surprise evident in his tone. "It's been a minute." "Marcus?" I managed, my voice raspy from pain. "I need your help." A pause. "Are you okay? You sound—" "I'm not," I interrupted, "but I will be." I took a shallow breath, careful of my ribs. "How do you feel about taking down one of the biggest names in corporate America?" He chuckled. "Depends on which one and what they did." "Montgomery Industries," I said. "And as for what they did, that's what I need your help to find out." Silence stretched between us. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Sharper, focused. "Tell me everything." So I did. About grandmother's will, about Thomas's violence, about the hints of corruption lurking beneath our family's polished reputation. As I spoke, something shifted inside me. Not just my broken ribs, but something deeper, more fundamental. The quiet, accommodating Sophia was gone. In her place, someone new was emerging. "They don't know what's coming," I whispered into the phone, the words feeling like a vow. On the other end, Marcus's voice was steady. "No," he agreed. "They don't." I spent the morning staring at the ceiling, watching dust particles dance in the sunlight. My ribs screamed with every breath, but the pain medication had worn off, and I wasn't ready to take more. I wanted clarity, needed it. The events at Rosewood kept replaying in my mind. Thomas's rage, my parents, silence, the sickening crack of bone against marble. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since yesterday. Texts from cousins fishing for details. Emails from board members welcoming me while barely disguising their skepticism. Voicemails from my mother that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. Nothing from Thomas. His silence spoke volumes. I forced myself to sit up, wincing as my body protested. The doctor had said 6 to 8 weeks for my ribs to heal. 6 to 8 weeks of this constant, stabbing reminder of what my family was capable of. I shuffled to the bathroom, avoiding my reflection as I washed my face. I didn't need to see what I already knew. The bruise blooming across my cheekbone, the haunted look in my eyes. The coffee machine gurgled to life, filling my apartment with the scent of normalcy. As if anything about this situation was normal, I checked my watch, 9:15. Marcus would be here soon. Last night's call had turned into a 2-hour conversation, with Marcus asking questions so incisive they made me realize how little I actually knew about my family's business. "This goes deeper than sibling rivalry," he'd said finally. "Something spooked Thomas badly enough to risk assault charges. We need to figure out what." A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. I moved carefully across the room, checking the peephole before opening it. Marcus Finch stood in the hallway, looking much the same as he had 5 years ago. Tall, serious, with those intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. The only difference was the confidence he now wore as comfortably as his tailored suit. "Sophia," he said, and then his expression changed as he took in my appearance. "Jesus Christ!" I stepped back to let him in. "I know, I look terrible." "You look like someone tried to kill you," he corrected, setting his briefcase on my coffee table. And from what you told me last night, that's not far from the truth. I shook my head, immediately regretting the movement as pain flared across me with a look. Would you accept that excuse from any other abuser? The word hit me like a slap. Abuser. I'd never thought of Thomas that way before, but of course, that's what he was. What he'd always been. With his cutting remarks, his intimidation, his calculated humiliations. No, I admitted, I wouldn't. Marcus nodded, satisfied, and opened his briefcase. I did some preliminary digging last night. Nothing deep yet, but enough to get us started. He pulled out a stack of folders and spread them across my coffee table. Montgomery Industries is on paper a model corporate citizen. Environmental initiatives, diversity programs, charity foundations, the works. But, I prompted, hearing the skepticism in his voice, but there are irregularities. Subsidiaries that seem to exist only to hold other subsidiaries. Financial reports with convenient gaps. And there's this. He handed me a printout of what looked like a news article from a small environmental journal. 3 years ago, a whistleblower claimed Montgomery was dumping chemical waste from one of its manufacturing plants into groundwater near a rural community in Wisconsin. I frowned. I never heard about this. Few people did. The story disappeared within days. The whistleblower recanted, claimed he'd made it all up. Marcus tapped the page. Then he suddenly had enough money to move to Arizona and buy a house in cash. My stomach tightened. You think my family paid him off? I think it's worth looking into. Marcus shuffled through more papers. There are other incidents too. Labor violations in overseas factories quietly settled. Land deals with indigenous communities that somehow always favor Montgomery. Political donations that coincide with favorable regulatory decisions. I sank onto the couch, careful of my ribs. I trailed off, not sure how to finish the sentence. Shocking? Not really. Some part of me had always suspected there was darkness beneath my family's golden facade. Disappointing? Absolutely. Grandmother had always emphasized integrity, had instilled in me a sense of right and wrong that felt unshakable. This is what you've inherited. Marcus finished for me. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I looked up at him. Everything. I'm going to fix everything. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. That's what I was hoping you'd say. He sat across from me. But before we can fix anything, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. And for that, we need access. Access to what? Company servers, financial records, board meeting minutes, internal communications. He leaned forward. Your grandmother left you controlling interest, but I'm guessing your family isn't exactly rolling out the red carpet. I laughed without humor. You could say that. I haven't even been to the corporate offices yet. We need to change that. Today. Fear gripped me. Today? I can barely move, Marcus. And I don't know the first thing about running a company. You don't have to run it today. You just have to show up. Establish presence. Let them know you're not going to disappear. He fixed me with a steady gaze. The longer you stay away, the more time Thomas has to entrench himself, to hide whatever he doesn't want you to find. I knew he was right, but the thought of facing a building full of people loyal to Thomas made me want to crawl back into bed. What if they refuse to let me in? Marcus raised an eyebrow. They can't. You own the place. He checked his watch. I've arranged for a car in an hour. That gives you time to get dressed and prepare yourself. I'll come with you. An hour later, I was sitting in the back of a sleek town car, trying to breathe through both physical pain and mounting anxiety. Marcus sat beside me, reviewing something on his tablet. He'd insisted I dress the part. Power dressing, he called it. I'd managed to find a black pantsuit in the back of my closet, paired with my grandmother's pearls. The effect in the mirror had been startling. Despite the bruises, I looked like someone to be reckoned with. Remember, Marcus said as we approached the gleaming Montgomery Industries headquarters in the financial district, you're not asking permission. You're taking what's already yours. The car pulled up to the curb. Through the tinted windows, I could see the massive glass entrance, the Montgomery logo etched into the doors. How many times had I walked past this building, feeling like an outsider to my own family legacy. Today I was walking in the front door. The lobby fell silent as we entered. The receptionist's eyes widened, clearly recognizing me despite, or perhaps because of, my bruised face. "Ms. Montgomery," she stammered. "Access to her office now." I'm not sure which office," she fumbled. "The CEO's office will do for now," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Her eyes darted to the security desk. "I should call upstairs first." "That won't be necessary," I said. "I own this building. I don't need permission to enter it." Before she could respond, the elevator doors opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. Not Thomas, thankfully, but Richard Donovan, my father's right-hand man and longtime CFO. "Sophia," he said, recovering quickly from his obvious shock. "What an unexpected pleasure." I held his gaze, refusing to flinch despite the throbbing pain in my side. "Richard, I'm here to claim my office and begin reviewing company operations." He glanced at Marcus, then back to me. "I see. Well, this is rather sudden. Perhaps we should schedule a proper orientation first? There are protocols, transitions to consider." The transition happened the moment my grandmother's will was read. Marcus interrupted. "Ms. Montgomery is now the majority shareholder and entitled to full access to all company resources." Richard's smile tightened. "Of course. But surely you understand, Sophia, that running a multinational corporation requires experience, knowledge, both of which I'll acquire," I cut in. "Starting today." A small crowd had gathered in the lobby, employees pretending to have business there while openly staring at the drama unfolding. I felt their eyes on my bruised face, on my too stiff posture protecting my broken ribs. Let them look. Let them see exactly what the Montgomery heir was capable of. Richard seemed to realize he was fighting a losing battle. "Very well. Allow me to escort you upstairs." The executive floor was hushed, expensive. Original artwork hung on the walls, pieces I would normally have stopped to admire. Today, I barely glanced at them. Richard led us to a corner office with sweeping views of the city. "Your grandmother's office," he explained. "It's been preserved since her departure from day-to-day operations." I stepped inside, feeling her presence immediately. The elegant desk where she'd taught me to play chess during school holidays. The bookshelf filled with first editions she'd collected over decades. The subtle scent of her perfume somehow still lingering. "Thank you, Richard," I said, moving behind the desk. "That will be all for now." He hesitated. "Thomas usually joins the executive committee meeting at 11. Should I inform him you're here?" "No need," I replied, sitting down carefully. "I'll see him soon enough." After Richard left, closing the door behind him, I let out a shaky breath. Marcus gave me an approving nod. "Well played." I wasn't feeling victorious. I was feeling overwhelmed. "This is surreal." "It's just beginning," he reminded me, taking a seat across from the desk. "We need to move fast. They're already scrambling to figure out how to contain you." I nodded, trying to channel my grandmother's strength. "Where do we start?" "Financial records," Marcus said decisively. "Follow the money, find the secrets." For the next hour, we dug through the computer system, Marcus guiding me through the corporate network. I was grateful for the semester of business informatics I'd taken before switching to art. At least I understood the basics of what we were looking at. What we found was both more and less than I expected. There were indeed irregularities, subsidiaries that seemed to exist only on paper, transactions that defied logical explanation, projects with vague descriptions and substantial budgets. "They've been careful," Marcus murmured, scrolling through a particularly dense financial report. "Nothing obviously illegal, but definitely questionable." I was about to respond when the office door swung open without a knock. Thomas stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from shock to cold fury in an instant. His gaze swept over me, then Marcus, then back to me. "Well, well," he drawled, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "Look who decided to play businesswoman today." I straightened in the chair, ignoring the stab of pain in my ribs. "Hello, Thomas. And you brought a friend." His eyes narrowed at Marcus. I don't believe we've been introduced. Marcus Finch, Marcus replied, not bothering to stand or offer his hand. Special counsel to Ms. Montgomery. They fit? They fit perfectly, I replied evenly. But I'm more interested in what I found in her files. It was a bluff. We hadn't actually accessed any of grandmother's personal files yet, but Thomas's reaction told me everything. His face paled slightly before he recovered. Her personal ramblings, no doubt, he said dismissively. Grandmother became confused in her final months. Strange, I countered. Mr. Harrington mentioned she was thoroughly evaluated and found to be of sound mind when she changed her will. Thomas's expression hardened. What exactly do you want, Sophia? To play corporate raider for a few weeks before you get bored and go back to your paintbrushes? What I want, I said, rising slowly from the chair, is the truth. About this company. About what you're hiding. About why you were so desperate to keep control that you were willing to put me in the hospital. He flinched almost imperceptibly at that. Good. Let him remember what he did. You're being dramatic, he scoffed. You fell. We both know that's not what happened, I said quietly. And so do the security cameras in grandmother's library. This time, Thomas couldn't hide his reaction. His eyes widened slightly, his confident posture faltering. There are no cameras in the library. Grandmother valued her privacy, it's true. I agreed. But after the Matisse disappeared last year, she had systems installed throughout the house. Didn't she tell you? Another bluff, but one that landed perfectly. Thomas's face drained of color. For a moment, I thought he might lunge across the desk at me again. Instead, he seemed to deflate slightly, his bravado cracking to reveal something I rarely saw in him. Fear. You're out of your depth, he said finally. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me, I challenged. What am I missing, Thomas? What was so important that you were willing to break your own sister's ribs to protect it? He glanced at Marcus, then back at me. Not here. Not with him. Marcus stays, I said firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of both of us. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I remembered from childhood. You think this is a game, Sophia? That you can just waltz in here and start making demands? There are people involved, powerful people, who won't take kindly to being exposed. Exposed for what? I pressed. He shook his head. I've said too much already. He straightened his tie, composure returning. Enjoy your little power trip. It won't last. With that, he turned and stalked out of the office, slamming the door behind him. Marcus let out a low whistle. Well, that was informative. Was it? I sank back into the chair, suddenly exhausted. We still don't know what he's hiding. But we know there's definitely something to hide, Marcus pointed out. And we know he's scared, that's a start. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with a text. I fished it out of my purse, expecting another message from my mother. Instead, it was from an unknown number. Parking garage. Level B2, 30 minutes. Come alone if you want the truth about your grandmother. I showed it to Marcus, who frowned. It's a trap. Or it's someone who knows something. I countered. Someone who can't be seen talking to me openly. Sophia, your brother just physically assaulted you 2 days ago. You can't seriously be considering meeting an anonymous person in a deserted parking garage. He had a point. But something about the message nagged at me. The phrasing, the directness. It didn't feel like Thomas's style. What if you come with me but stay out of sight, I suggested. Close enough to intervene if needed, but not visible to whoever sent this. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he sighed. Fine, but we're setting ground rules. You stay in open areas, near security cameras. You keep your phone on and recording. And if I text you to leave, you leave immediately. No questions. 30 minutes later, I stepped off the elevator into the cavernous Level B2 parking garage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the concrete pillars. I moved slowly, still careful of my ribs, scanning for any sign of who might have sent the message. Ms. Montgomery. I nearly jumped out of my skin at the voice behind me. Turning, I found myself face to face with a woman I vaguely recognized. You wanted to tell me something about my grandmother? Ms. Chen glanced around the garage, then back at me. Not here. Too many ears, even in a parking garage. She held out a small USB drive. This contains what you're looking for. I hesitated before taking it. And what exactly am I looking for? The real reason your grandmother changed her will. Ms. Chen's expression softened slightly. She knew what was happening. She tried to stop it, but they wouldn't listen. So she did the only thing she could. She put you in charge. Why me? I asked. The question that had been haunting me since the will reading. Because you were the only one she trusted to make it right. Ms. Chen took a step back. The password is, Sparrow, your childhood nickname. Only she called you that. My throat tightened. Grandmother had indeed called me her little sparrow, but it had been our secret, a private endearment. Why are you helping me? I asked. Ms. Chen's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. I respected Eleanor Montgomery more than anyone I've ever known. She believed in you. Her expression hardened. And I was there when Thomas convinced your father to leverage company assets for his personal ventures. When they lied to her face about it. When they threatened my job if I told her the truth. I clutched the USB drive tighter. Thank you. She nodded once more, then turned to leave. Be careful, Ms. Montgomery. Your brother isn't the only one with something to lose. Back in grandmother's office, Marcus plugged the USB drive into a laptop he'd brought specifically for this purpose. Never trust company hardware, he'd warned. The drive contained dozens of files. Financial records, emails, board meeting minutes, and most damning of all, recordings. Grandmother, it seemed, had taken to recording conversations in her final months. We listened in stunned silence to Thomas and my father discussing what they called creative accounting, to hide losses from Thomas's failed investment scheme. We heard them planning to use company funds to cover personal debts. And most disturbing of all, we heard them discussing what would happen when the old lady finally kicks it. We'll have to act fast, my father's voice said through the laptop speakers. Make sure everything's locked down before anyone starts asking questions. What about Sophia? Thomas asked. She's always been her favorite. My father's laugh was cold. Sophia doesn't know the first thing about business. She'll take whatever token we give her and go back to her little artist's life. She always does. The recording ended. I sat frozen, the betrayal like ice in my veins. They were stealing from their own company, Marcus said finally, using corporate funds to cover Thomas's gambling debts and failed investments. That's securities fraud, embezzlement. And grandmother knew. I finished. She knew, and she was gathering evidence. Evidence she's now handed to you, Marcus pointed out, through Ms. Chen. I stared at the screen, mind racing. So what do we do with it? Marcus leaned forward. That depends on what you want. Justice? Revenge? Control? There are different paths for different outcomes. I thought about Thomas's rage, my parents, silent complicity, the way they'd all underestimated me my entire life. But I also thought about grandmother's faith in me, about the responsibilities she'd entrusted to me. I want to make it right, I said finally. All of it. The next morning, I arrived at Montgomery Industries headquarters, flanked by Marcus and 2 other attorneys from his firm. Word had spread quickly. The lobby was abuzz with whispers as we crossed to the elevators. This time, no one tried to stop us. The boardroom was already full when we entered. Thomas sat at the far end, my father beside him. The rest of the seats were occupied by board members, most of whom I recognized from holiday parties and charity galas. Their expressions ranged from curious to hostile. Gentlemen, I said, nodding to the room as I took my place at the head of the table. My ribs ached, but I refused to show weakness. Thank you for coming on such short notice. What is the meaning of this, Sophia? My father demanded. You can't just call an emergency board meeting without… Actually, she can, Marcus interrupted smoothly. As majority shareholder, Ms. Montgomery has the authority to convene the board at any time. My father's face reddened. And who are you to interpret our bylaws? Marcus Finch, special counsel to Ms. Montgomery, he replied. And these are my colleagues, specializing in corporate law and forensic accounting. A murmur ran through the room. Thomas's knuckles whitened where he gripped the edge of the table. Let's not waste time, I said, opening the folder before me. I've called this meeting to address serious concerns about the financial management of Montgomery Industries under the previous leadership. For the next 30 minutes, I laid out everything we had found: the misappropriated funds, the covered-up environmental violations, the political bribes disguised as charitable donations. I played selected portions of grandmother's recordings, watching as the color drained from both Thomas's and my father's faces. This is absurd, Thomas finally sputtered when I finished. These recordings are clearly edited, taken out of context. The full versions are available for the board's review. I cut in, along with the complete paper trail my grandmother compiled before her death. One of the board members, an older woman who had been a friend of grandmother's, leaned forward. Eleanor knew about all this? I nodded. She discovered what was happening and spent her final months gathering evidence. Evidence she entrusted to me. So what now? Another board member asked. Are you planning to go public with this? Destroy the company your grandmother built? No, I said simply. I'm planning to save it. I slid a second folder into the center of the table. This contains my proposed restructuring plan. Complete transparency moving forward. Full environmental remediation for the affected sites. Restitution to the communities harmed by our past actions. And new leadership. My father stood, face mottled with rage. This is outrageous. You have no idea what you're doing. Sit down, Dad, I said quietly, or the next call I make will be to the SEC. He sat. I'm not interested in revenge, I continued, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. I'm interested in redemption. Montgomery Industries can be better than this. It will be better than this. Starting today. The vote that followed was closer than I would have liked, but in the end, the majority sided with me. Thomas and my father were removed from their positions, pending a full investigation. An interim management team was appointed, with me as acting CEO until a suitable replacement could be found. As the boardroom emptied, Thomas lingered, waiting until we were alone before approaching me. For a moment I tensed, remembering the feel of marble against my back, the crack of ribs giving way. But the man before me now was deflated, the arrogance gone from his posture. You won, he said simply. Congratulations. This wasn't about winning, Thomas, I replied. It was about doing what's right. He laughed, a hollow sound. Always so righteous. So pure. He shook his head. You know they'll never accept you. This world, our world, it chews up idealists and spits them out. Maybe, I conceded, but I'm not afraid to try. He studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. No, you're not, are you? That's what she saw in you. What I never had. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. I am sorry, you know. About your ribs. I never meant. He stopped, shook his head. It doesn't matter what I meant. And then he was gone, leaving me alone in the boardroom with the weight of grandmother's legacy on my shoulders. 6 months later, I stood at the podium in the Montgomery Industries lobby, unveiling the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation, a new initiative focused on environmental justice and corporate accountability. The press was there in force, cameras flashing as I cut the ribbon. My grandmother believed that power comes with responsibility, I told the crowd. That true strength lies not in dominance, but in service. In making things right when they've gone wrong. My ribs had healed, though they still ached sometimes when rain was coming. The bruises had faded from my face. But the lessons, about family, about power, about standing up when it would be easier to stay silent, those remained, etched into me as surely as my name was etched into the foundation plaque. As I finished my speech and stepped away from the podium, my phone buzzed with a text. I expected it to be from Marcus, who had become both a trusted advisor and a close friend over these months of transformation. Instead, it was from an unknown number. "She would be proud of you, Sparrow. You've built something beautiful from the broken pieces." I scanned the crowd but saw no familiar faces watching me. Just the future, unfolding one decision at a time. They had wanted me silent. They had broken my body trying to keep me in line. But they forgot one essential truth. Sometimes the ones you underestimate are exactly the ones who will change everything. 1 year had passed since the bruises faded and the fractures healed. The physical wounds had mended, but the transformation they sparked continued to reshape everything I thought I knew about business, family, and my own capacity for leadership. The Eleanor Montgomery Foundation had grown from a press release into a force for corporate accountability, pushing industries far beyond Montgomery's reach to examine their own ethical blind spots. The morning sun poured through the windows of what was once grandmother's office, now officially mine after the board unanimously voted to make my temporary position permanent 6 months ago. I stood gazing at the city below, coffee cooling on my desk, as I prepared for perhaps the most important meeting of my career. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Ms. Montgomery? They're ready for you in the boardroom." I nodded to my assistant, not Ms. Chen, who had retired comfortably with grandmother's generous parting gift, but a bright young MBA with a passion for sustainable business practices. "Thank you, Amara. I'll be right there." The walk down the executive corridor felt different now. Where I once moved cautiously, hyper-aware of being an interloper, I now strode with quiet confidence. Portraits of past Montgomery CEOs lined the walls. All men, all with the same stern expression until grandmother's portrait, and now, at the end, mine. The artist had captured something I hadn't seen in myself before, a blend of determination and compassion that reminded me of grandmother more than the rest of my family. The boardroom fell silent as I entered. 12 faces turned toward me. The newly formed board of directors, carefully selected for both business acumen and ethical backbone. No longer my father's golfing buddies, or Thomas's Ivy League connections, but people who believed in the vision I'd been crafting. "Good morning," I began, setting my portfolio on the table. "Thank you all for coming today. As you know, this meeting marks a significant milestone, 1 year since we began Montgomery's transformation." I opened my laptop, bringing up the presentation I'd been fine-tuning for weeks. The numbers speak for themselves. Despite initial market skepticism, our stock has risen 22% since the restructuring. Our ethical supply chain initiative has reduced costs by 15%, while improving labor conditions across 4 continents. The environmental remediation projects are ahead of schedule and under budget. Nods of approval around the table. These were the easy wins, the concrete results that satisfied shareholders and analysts alike. But what came next would test their commitment to the deeper changes I envisioned. Today, however, I'm not here to talk about what we've accomplished. I'm here to propose where we go next. I clicked to the next slide, revealing the bold title, "The Montgomery Inheritance Beyond Profit." For the next 30 minutes, I outlined my vision, a radical reimagining of corporate purpose that placed environmental sustainability and social justice at the core of Montgomery's business model, not as charitable add-ons but as fundamental operating principles. I proposed divesting from industries that couldn't be made sustainable, investing heavily in green technology, and most controversially, restructuring our compensation system to reduce the gap between highest and lowest paid employees. When I finished, the silence was deafening. I'd expected pushback, particularly from the old guard board members who had survived the transition. Instead, the first to speak was Eliza Nwosu, our newest director and a renowned expert in corporate ethics. "It's ambitious," she said finally. "Possibly too ambitious for immediate implementation. But it's exactly the direction this company, and frankly all companies, need to move toward." She smiled. "Eleanor would be proud." The mention of grandmother sent a pang through my chest. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I hope so." Discussion erupted around the table. Pragmatic concerns about implementation timelines, questions about shareholder reactions, suggestions for phased approaches. But underneath it all ran a current of excitement, of purpose. This wasn't just business as usual. This was something new. 3 hours later, we emerged with a modified but intact plan, approved by unanimous vote. As the board members filed out, Marcus lingered behind, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, CEO Montgomery," he said once we were alone, "you did it." I exhaled slowly, the tension of the morning finally releasing. We did it. I couldn't have navigated any of this without you. He shrugged, but I could see the pride in his eyes. Over the past year, our professional relationship had deepened into something more complex. Friendship, certainly. Respect, definitely. And something else neither of us had been ready to name. "Dinner to celebrate?" he suggested. "That new place on Riverside you've been wanting to try?" I smiled. "Rain check? There's somewhere else I need to be tonight." Understanding crossed his face. "Anniversary dinner with your team? I heard they were planning something." I shook my head. Something more important. The drive to Rosewood Estate took 40 minutes, the familiar route winding through increasingly exclusive neighborhoods until I reached the wrought iron gates that had once represented everything I was running from. Now they swung open at my approach, welcoming me home. The house had changed since I'd officially moved in 6 months ago. Gone were the stuffy drapes and imposing furniture chosen more for appearance than comfort. Instead, light flowed freely through uncovered windows, and the rooms had been repainted in warm, inviting colors. Grandmother's prized art collection remained, but I'd added pieces by emerging artists, creating a dialogue between past and future. I parked in the circular drive and checked my watch. Right on time. The front door opened before I reached it. Thomas stood in the entryway, his appearance markedly different from the polished executive he'd once been. His designer suits had been replaced by casual clothes, his hair slightly longer, his face thinner, but somehow more at peace. "Sophia," he said with a nod that wasn't quite warm but lacked the hostility of our past encounters. "You're punctual as always." "Old habits," I replied, stepping past him into the foyer. "How are you?" A loaded question. After the board meeting that had removed him from power, Thomas had spiraled briefly. Drinking too much, making angry scenes at family events, even showing up at my apartment one night demanding to be let back into the company. Then, just as suddenly, he'd disappeared. 6 months with no contact, until the email that arrived last week. "I'm ready to talk, if you're willing to listen." "Better," he answered after a moment's consideration. "The therapy is helping. So is the volunteer work. Part of our agreement, therapy twice weekly, and community service in exchange for my not pressing charges." The legal system might have given him a slap on the wrist for a first-time assault, but I'd wanted something more meaningful than a fine or probation. "I'm glad to hear it." I followed him into what had once been grandmother's solarium, now my favorite room in the house. Plants thrived in the abundant light, creating a living sanctuary amid the grandeur of Rosewood. He gestured for me to sit but remained standing himself, as if too restless to settle. "I've been following the company's progress. The changes you've made, they're impressive." Coming from Thomas, this was high praise indeed. I studied his face, looking for signs of the resentment that had defined our relationship for so long. Instead, I found something closer to resignation, maybe even respect. "Thank you," I said simply. "You're doing things I would never have considered," he continued. "Things Father would have dismissed as idealistic nonsense, but they're working." He shook his head slightly. "She knew what she was doing when she chose you." The mention of grandmother hung between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Why did you ask me here, Thomas?" I finally asked. "After all this time?" He moved to the windows, looking out at the gardens where we'd played as children, before competition and jealousy had poisoned everything between us. "I found something." while I was clearing out my apartment for the move. You're moving? A faint smile touched his lips. Colorado. There's a conservation organization there doing work I believe in. They've offered me a position. This was unexpected. Thomas, who'd once dismissed environmental concerns as liberal hand-wringing, now working in conservation? That's quite a change. Everything's changed, Sophia. He turned back to face me. Including me. At least, I'm trying. He crossed to a side table and picked up a small wooden box I hadn't noticed before. This belonged to grandmother. Father gave it to me when I turned 18. Said it contained the keys to the Montgomery legacy. He ran his fingers along the inlaid pattern. I never opened it. Thought I already knew everything I needed to know about our legacy. He held it out to me. I think it was always meant for you. I took the box, feeling its unexpected weight. The wood was warm, polished by. Generations of hands. A small brass key protruded from the lock. You haven't looked inside? Thomas shook his head. Not my inheritance to claim anymore. I turned the key slowly. The lid opened with a soft creak, revealing a velvet interior cradling several items. A small leather journal, a set of old photographs, and an envelope with my name written in grandmother's distinctive hand. My throat tightened. I don't understand. Why would Father give this to you if it contains a letter to me? Because he never looked either, Thomas replied. Grandfather gave it to him the same way. Closed, with instructions to pass it on. Family tradition, apparently. I lifted the envelope carefully, breaking the wax seal that had kept it closed for who knew how long. Inside was a single sheet of grandmother's personal stationery, dated just weeks before her death. My dearest Sophia, if you're reading this, then you've claimed your inheritance. Not just the material assets, though those are yours by right, but the true Montgomery legacy that has skipped generations until now. When I was a young woman, I made a promise to my grandfather that I would use the privilege and power of our name to make the world better than I found it. For a time, I kept that promise. Montgomery Industries became a force for progress, for positive change. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of that purpose. The pursuit of profit became an end in itself. The legacy became about wealth, not impact. I allowed your father and Thomas to steer us toward shortcuts and compromises I knew were wrong. My greatest regret is not correcting course sooner. By the time I realized how far we had strayed, my health was failing, and the old guard was firmly entrenched. But in you, I see the chance to fulfill that original promise. You have always seen the world not just as it is, but as it could be. You have your great-grandfather's moral compass and my stubborn determination. A powerful combination. The journal contains his original vision for Montgomery. Not just a company, but a movement for ethical capitalism when such ideas were revolutionary. The photographs are reminders of what wealth is truly for. Not isolation in ivory towers, but connection to the communities we serve. There will be resistance. There will be those who call you naive, impractical, even dangerous to shareholder interests. Stand firm. The true purpose of power is not self-enrichment, but service to others. This is your inheritance, Sophia. Not just assets to manage, but a vision to fulfill. I believe in you more than you can know. With all my love, Eleanor. I looked up from the letter to find Thomas watching me, his expression unreadable. What does it say? He asked quietly. I hesitated, then passed it to him. Some boundaries between us had begun to dissolve, though others would always remain. He read in silence, his face softening as he reached the end. She never told me any of this, he said finally, returning the letter. About great-grandfather's vision, about her regrets. Would you have listened? I asked, not unkindly. He considered this, then shook his head. Probably not. I was too busy trying to be what Father wanted. I opened the journal next, carefully turning pages filled with elegant script from a century ago. James Montgomery, our great-grandfather, had indeed been ahead of his time, advocating for worker protections, environmental considerations, and community investment long before such ideas became mainstream. He founded the company during the Depression, I murmured, scanning the entries. Started by paying workers twice the going rate and providing housing when no one could afford rent. Thomas leaned forward to see. Father always said the company began as a small manufacturing operation. He never mentioned any of this. Because it didn't fit the narrative he wanted to believe, I realized. That wealth comes from being smarter and working harder than everyone else, not from moral obligation to a community. The photographs told their own story. James Montgomery standing proudly with his workers, breaking ground on a housing development, opening a company-sponsored school. Eleanor as a young woman continuing his work, before the gradual shift toward traditional corporate structures under my father's influence. We sat together as the sun set, piecing together a family history neither of us had truly known. Not the sanitized version from annual reports, or the cynical take Thomas had embraced, but something more complex and, ultimately, more hopeful. I can see why she chose you, Thomas said finally, closing Ully onto it, feeling the journal. You're like him, like she was before everything changed. I never wanted to be your enemy, Thomas, I said softly. I just wanted to be valued for who I was, not punished for who I wasn't. He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. I know that now. Too late, probably. Not too late to start something new, I countered. That's what I've been trying to do with the company. Maybe we can do the same with whatever this is between us. Not forgiveness, exactly. Some wounds ran too deep for that. But perhaps understanding. A recognition that we'd both been shaped by forces larger than ourselves. Trapped in roles neither of us had fully chosen. Colorado's pretty far away, he said, a question in his voice. They have phones there, I hear, and airports. I managed a small smile. Besides, Montgomery is looking to expand our conservation partnerships. We might need an inside consultant. The surprise on his face was worth it. You'd consider working with me, after everything? Not immediately, I clarified. Trust takes time to rebuild. But eventually, yes. If you're serious about changing, I am. For once there was no artifice in his voice, no calculation, just simple truth. As I drove back to the city that night, the wooden box secure on the seat beside me, I felt a strange sense of completion. Not an ending. There was too much work still to do, but the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. The road ahead would be challenging. Transforming a corporate giant was difficult enough. Healing a broken family might be even harder. But for the first time in my life, I felt fully aligned with my purpose, guided by grandmother's faith and great-grandfather's vision. The broken ribs had long since healed, but the breaking itself had revealed something essential, that sometimes pain becomes the doorway to transformation. 2 weeks later, I stood in the newly renovated Montgomery Industries lobby, addressing employees gathered for the unveiling of our comprehensive sustainability initiative. The crowd was larger than I'd expected, flowing out into the plaza where screens had been set up to accommodate everyone. A century ago, I began. My great-grandfather founded this company with a radical idea that business could be a force for good in the world, that profit and purpose could walk hand in hand. Somewhere along the way, we lost sight of that vision. Today, we reclaim it. The presentation that followed outlined not just environmental goals, but a complete reimagining of corporate citizenship. Fair wages throughout our supply chain, transparent governance, community reinvestment, and a commitment to measure our success not just by financial metrics, but by human impact. This won't be easy, I acknowledged as I concluded. Meaningful change never is. There will be quarters when our profits dip, There will be shareholders who demand shortcuts. There will be competitors who undercut us while externalizing their true costs onto communities and ecosystems. I surveyed the faces looking back at me, some skeptical, some inspired, all attentive. But we have something they don't, a legacy worth fulfilling and the courage to pursue it even when it's difficult. Especially when it's difficult. The applause that followed wasn't the polite corporate kind, but something more genuine, the sound of people connecting with purpose beyond a paycheck. As I stepped away from the podium, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Thomas, watching the live stream. Great-grandfather would be proud, so am I. Later that evening, as I sat in my office reviewing the day's press coverage, Marcus appeared in the doorway, 2 takeout containers in hand. "Since you canceled on our celebration dinner last week," he explained, setting them on the desk, "I thought I'd bring dinner to you. Hope that's okay." The gesture touched me more than I expected. More than okay. I'm starving. We ate companionably, discussing the initiative launch and the surprisingly positive market reaction. When we'd finished, Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying me with that perceptive gaze that had become so familiar. "You seem different," he observed. "More at peace, somehow." I considered this. I think I'm finally understanding what grandmother saw in me, why she trusted me with all this. It wasn't because I was perfect for the role, it was because she knew I'd grow into it. "And have you?" I smiled. "I'm getting there. One decision at a time." The city lights twinkled below us, millions of lives intersecting in ways both mundane and profound. Somewhere out there were the communities we were working to serve, the ecosystems we were striving to protect, the future we were attempting to shape. "You know," Marcus said thoughtfully, "when you first called me that night with broken ribs and fire in your eyes, I thought you were just looking for revenge against your brother. Part of me was," I admitted, "but revenge is too small a purpose to sustain you. This is about something bigger." He nodded. "Legacy. Not the kind that comes with a name or a trust fund, but the kind you build yourself, choice by choice." "Exactly." I rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the city I'd once felt so disconnected from, now full of possibility. Thomas's violence was meant to silence me, to keep me in my place. Instead, it became the catalyst for finding my voice. Marcus joined me at the window, his presence steady and grounding. Some people spend their whole lives without finding their purpose. You found yours through fire. Not just found it. I corrected gently, chose it. That's the difference. We don't just inherit our lives. We create them, even from broken pieces. Especially from broken pieces. The truth of this settled in my chest, replacing the phantom pain of healed fractures with something stronger. One phone call after that violent night had indeed changed everything, not by some magical intervention, but by setting in motion a series of choices that had transformed not just a company, but a life. My life. Not defined by what was done to me, but by what I chose to do in response, not limited by others' expectations, but expanded by my own vision of what could be. They had wanted me silent. They had broken my body trying to keep me in line. But in that breaking, they had inadvertently released something far more powerful than they could have imagined. A woman who knew her worth, who understood her purpose, and who would never again mistake compliance for peace. That was the true inheritance. Not the fortune, not the company, not even the family name, but the unshakable knowledge that our greatest strength often emerges from our deepest wounds, if we have the courage to learn their lessons. 5 years had passed since that violent night at my grandmother's estate. 5 years of transformation, not just for Montgomery Industries, but for me. The frightened woman who once hid in the corner of family gatherings, hoping to avoid notice, had become someone else entirely. a leader whose name was now mentioned in the same breath as other visionary CEOs, reshaping the business landscape. I stood at the window of my office, watching the sun rise over the city skyline. Today marked the 5th anniversary of the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation, and with it, the culmination of our most ambitious project yet, breaking ground on affordable, sustainable housing developments in 5 cities simultaneously. The idea had seemed impossible when I'd first proposed it, but that was before we'd proven that ethical business could also be profitable business. My phone buzzed softly on the desk. A text from Thomas. Landed safely. Looking forward to seeing the Denver project take shape. Good luck with the press today. Our relationship had evolved into something neither of us could have predicted. Not the close bond of typical siblings, but a measured, respectful collaboration centered around the Foundation's environmental work. His expertise in conservation had proven valuable, and his commitment to making amends genuine. The rage that once defined him seemed to have burned out, replaced by a quieter determination to be part of the solution. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Marcus entered, carrying 2 coffee cups and a tablet tucked under his arm. "You're here early," I observed, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Big day." He smiled, the expression softening his usually serious features. "The press is already setting up downstairs, and the video feeds from the other sites are all testing successfully." In the 5 years since he'd first guided me through the corporate battlefield, Marcus had become far more. Made the biggest mistake of my life by standing up to Thomas. And now you're changing how an entire industry thinks about its responsibilities. He set his coffee down and moved closer, his presence as steady and reassuring as always. "You should be proud." "I am," I admitted. "But not just of the company or the foundation. I'm proud of how far I've come, who I've become. The journey hadn't been easy. For every victory, there had been setbacks. Board members who resisted change, shareholders who prioritized short-term profits, competitors who spread rumors about the naive artist playing CEO. Even my parents had fought me, filing lawsuit after lawsuit to regain control until the evidence of their financial misconduct had finally forced them to retreat, bitter and unrepentant, to a villa in Europe. But through it all, something in me had remained unbroken. A core of strength I hadn't known I possessed until that moment when Thomas's violence meant to diminish me had instead catalyzed my transformation. "Ms. Montgomery?" My assistant's voice came through the intercom. "The board members are gathering in the conference room, and Ms. Nwosu asked me to remind you about the new initiative you wanted to discuss before the ceremony." "Thank you, Amara. I'll be right there." I turned to Marcus. "Duty calls." He smiled, brushing a kiss against my temple. "Go change the world. I'll see you downstairs." The boardroom hummed with excitement as I entered. What had once been a room dominated by older men in identical suits now reflected the diversity I'd prioritized. Different genders, backgrounds, ages, and perspectives, united by a shared vision of business as a force for good. "Good morning, everyone," I began, taking my place at the head of the table. "Before we head down for the ceremony, I wanted to share an idea I've been developing, something that builds on the success of the housing initiative." For the next 15 minutes, I outlined my proposal, a comprehensive program to address the root causes of homelessness, combining housing with mental health services, job training, and community support systems. Not charity, but investment in human potential. The pilot would launch in 3 cities, I concluded, with Montgomery providing both funding and expertise in sustainable development. Eliza Nwosu, who had become my closest ally on the board, leaned forward. "It's ambitious," she said, echoing her words from years ago, "and exactly what we should be doing. The question is, can we scale it if the pilot succeeds?" "That's where our new partnership with the Chen Foundation comes in," I replied, referring to the organization founded by grandmother's former assistant, who had leveraged her knowledge of corporate philanthropy into creating one of the most effective charitable foundations in the country. They've already expressed interest in matching our investment. Discussion flowed around the table, practical concerns, innovative suggestions, refinements to the proposal. This was what I loved most about the new Montgomery, the collaborative spirit, the focus on impact rather than ego. No one person had all the answers, but together we could address challenges that once seemed insurmountable. By the time we filed out for the ceremony, the proposal had evolved into something even stronger, with unanimous board support. The lobby had been transformed for the occasion, with screens showing live feeds from the other project sites across the country. Media representatives clustered near the podium, while employees and community partners filled the remaining space. As I moved through the crowd, I was stopped repeatedly by people wanting to share what the foundation's work had meant to them: the single mother who'd received one of our housing grants, the environmental engineer whose innovative design had been implemented in the Phoenix project, the community organizer who'd helped us navigate local concerns. These connections, these impacts on real lives, meant more to me than any financial success. They were the true measure of what we'd built. As I took my place at the podium, the room quieted. 5 cameras broadcast the event to our other locations, creating a unified celebration across thousands of miles. 5 years ago, I began, the Eleanor Montgomery Foundation emerged from a moment of personal crisis. My grandmother had entrusted me with her legacy, but it wasn't until I faced my own breaking point that I truly understood what that legacy was meant to be. I glanced down at my notes but found I didn't need them. This story lived in my bones. Many of you know parts of that story. How a family conflict escalated to violence, how I ended up in the hospital with broken ribs, and a determination to reclaim not just my inheritance but my voice. What you may not know is how that moment of breaking became the foundation for everything we're celebrating today. The room was utterly silent, every face attentive. In the front row, Marcus gave me an encouraging nod. There's a Japanese art form called kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, creating something more beautiful than the original. The breaks aren't hidden, they're highlighted, honored as part of the object's history. For 5 years, that's been our philosophy at Montgomery. Not to hide the cracks in our systems, but to illuminate them, to repair them with something stronger and more beautiful than what came before. I gestured to the screens showing our other project sites, where local teams were gathered for their own ceremonies. Today, we break ground on 5 communities that will provide safe, sustainable housing for over 2,000 families. But we're building more than just homes. We're building a model for how business can serve humanity, not through token philanthropy, but through fundamental reimagining of what success looks like. The applause that followed was heartfelt, rippling across all 5 locations. As it subsided, I continued. I'm also pleased to announce a new initiative that builds on this foundation. A comprehensive program addressing the root causes of housing instability through integrated support systems. I outlined the vision the board had just approved, watching as journalists scribbled notes and employees exchanged excited glances. This was the Montgomery difference, constantly pushing forward, refusing to rest on past accomplishments. None of this would be possible without the courage and commitment of everyone in this room and at our locations across the country. You didn't just accept change. You embraced it, improved upon it, and made it your own. For that, I am profoundly grateful. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed, I found myself drawn to the memorial wall we'd installed in the lobby, a tribute to grandmother and her vision. Her portrait hung alongside images from each of our major initiatives, creating a visual timeline of the transformation she had set in motion. "She would be incredibly proud," came a voice from behind me. I turned to find Eliza standing there, her expression thoughtful. "Not just of the foundation's work, but of you, Sophia. The leader you've become." "I hope so," I admitted. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm figuring it out as I go." She laughed. "That's the secret no one tells you. We're all figuring it out as we go." The difference is having the courage to keep going even when the path isn't clear. After the crowds had thinned and the press had departed, I slipped away to the rooftop garden we'd installed 3 years ago, an urban oasis of native plants and honeybee hives that produced honey we donated to local food banks. It was my favorite place to think, to reconnect with the artistic side of myself that sometimes got buried under spreadsheets and strategy sessions. I found a quiet bench beneath a flowering tree and sat, letting the afternoon sun warm my face. 5 years. It seemed both an eternity and an instant since that night at Rosewood when Thomas's rage had shattered more than just my ribs. The door to the rooftop opened and Marcus emerged, scanning the garden until he spotted me. He crossed the space with long, easy strides, settling beside me on the bench. "Hiding from your admirers?" he teased gently. "Just catching my breath," I replied. "It's been a full day." He nodded, understanding without words the complex emotions such milestones often triggered. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching bees move methodically among the lavender blooms. "I got an interesting call this morning," he said finally. "From your brother. This caught my attention." Marcus and Thomas maintained a strictly professional relationship, their interactions limited to foundation business. "What did he want?" "To ask for my blessing," Marcus replied, surprise still evident in his voice. "He's planning to come to the engagement party next month. Said he wanted to make sure his presence wouldn't make things uncomfortable for either of us." I felt an unexpected tightness in my throat. 5 years ago, such consideration from Thomas would have been unimaginable. "What did you tell him?" "That he's your brother, and if his presence would make you happy, then I was all for it." Marcus turned to face me. Was that the right answer? I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. The journey with Thomas had been complicated. Forgiveness neither simple nor complete, but a gradual process of rebuilding something different than what came before. Like kintsugi, the breaks remained visible, but they were no longer raw, no longer dangerous. "It was the perfect answer," I said finally. "I want him there. Not because..." "We've forgotten the past, but because we've both found ways to build something meaningful from it." Marcus smiled, taking my hand in his. "That seems to be your specialty, creating beauty from broken things." The phrase echoed through me, resonating with the truth I had come to understand over these 5 years. My greatest strength had emerged, not despite my wounds, but because of them. The breaking had revealed a resilience I might never have discovered otherwise. Later that evening, I returned to Rosewood alone. The estate had evolved alongside me, becoming not just a home but a sanctuary, part private residence, part art studio where I still painted when time allowed, and part retreat center where Montgomery employees could come to reconnect with the company's core values through immersive workshops. I made my way to the library, the room where it had all begun. The marble mantelpiece still stood, unchanged, but I no longer flinched when I passed it. Instead, I ran my fingers along its cool surface, acknowledging rather than avoiding the memory. On the desk lay a leather-bound journal, not my great-grandfather's this time, but my own. I'd begun keeping it 3 years ago, recording not just business decisions but personal reflections, creating a chronicle that might someday guide another young woman faced with similar challenges. I opened to a fresh page and began to write. 5 years ago today, my brother broke my ribs over an inheritance he believed was his birthright. He thought violence would silence me, keep me in the box where he and my parents had always placed me, the disappointing daughter, the artistic dreamer, the one who didn't matter. Instead, that moment of breaking became the foundation for everything that followed. Not because pain is necessary for growth. I reject that narrative entirely. But because in responding to that pain, I discovered capacities within myself I might otherwise never have recognized. The philosopher Khalil Gibran wrote, "The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain." I've found this to be true, though not in the way one might expect. It's not that suffering somehow earns us happiness. Rather, when we face our darkest moments with courage, we expand our capacity for all experience, including joy, purpose, and impact. My brother's violence was meant to diminish me. to remind me of my place in a hierarchy I never chose. Instead, it became the catalyst for dismantling that very hierarchy, for creating something more equitable, more sustainable, more aligned with the values my grandmother tried to instill in all of us. If there's wisdom in this journey, perhaps it's this: our wounds don't define us, but our response to them might. The breaking points in our lives can become turning points if we allow them to be. Not because breaking is good, it isn't, but because human resilience is remarkable, capable of transforming even our most painful experiences into sources of strength, purpose, and connection. Today, as we broke ground on communities that will house thousands, I thought about all the forms of breaking and building that brought us to this moment. The broken systems we're working to repair. The broken trust we're striving to rebuild. The broken parts of ourselves that, when acknowledged rather than hidden, can become sources of empathy and understanding. Thomas's violence was never justified, never excusable. But in its aftermath, I found not just my voice but my purpose, not just my strength but my community, not just my inheritance but my legacy. And that, perhaps, is the most meaningful transformation of all. I closed the journal, feeling a sense of completion that had nothing to do with projects finished or goals achieved, but with the internal journey these 5 years had represented. The frightened woman with broken ribs had become someone who could look at her scars, both literal and figurative, and see not weakness but evidence of her capacity. What happened there? But because I'd refused to let that moment define either the room or me. They'd wanted me silent, controllable, confined to the narrow role they'd assigned me. They'd broken my body trying to break my spirit, but in that breaking, they'd inadvertently released something they never anticipated: my power, my purpose, my unwavering commitment to creating meaning from pain, beauty from brokenness, and justice from injustice. That was the true story beneath the headlines about Montgomery's transformation, beneath the reports on our ethical business practices and community investments. Not just a corporation changing its course, but a woman reclaiming her voice, her vision, her rightful place in the world. My phone buzzed again, a news alert this time. The story about our housing initiative was trending nationally, with analysts calling it a new model for corporate responsibility in the 21st century. I smiled as I slipped the phone back into my pocket. The external validation was nice, but it wasn't what drove me. What drove me was the promise I'd made to myself in that hospital room 5 years ago, ribs throbbing with each breath, that I would transform this pain into purpose, this breaking into building, this inheritance into legacy. Not just for myself, but for everyone touched by Montgomery's work. As I walked toward my car, the setting sun cast long shadows across the estate grounds. Ahead lay a future I was still creating, day by day, decision by decision. Behind lay the broken pieces I'd gathered and reformed into something stronger, more beautiful, more meaningful than what came before. Thomas had broken my ribs thinking he could break my spirit. Instead, he had inadvertently freed it. That freedom to define myself, to chart my own course, to use power as a force for good rather than control, was the most precious inheritance of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.